Bandwidth provided by Recursive Squirrel Interactive. Visit them on the web at recursivesquirrel.com. Episode 642, Afraid to Come Forward. For Monday, July 12th, 2021, it's time for this week's edition of the BeanCast, a weekly discussion about the news and issues facing marketers today. I'm your host, Bob North. Thanks for joining us. An article by ad pro Zoe Scaman once again confronted the ad industry with the rampant sexism and sexual assault within the business. But there's a new wrinkle this time. Now guilty execs are hiding behind company DEI efforts. What can be done? Tonight on this special episode, we'll discuss the issues in depth, exploring strategies for confronting sexism in the workplace, and providing a roadmap for allyship. Plus, we have this week's Fair, Fail, Foul. That's the lineup. Let's meet tonight's panel. Thanks for joining us for this week's BeanCast. I'm Bob Norp, and with me on the panel for this evening, we start with the founder and principal consultant at The Difference Engine, Ms. Farrah Bostic. Hi, Farrah.
Hi, Bob. We meet again.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Now, also with us, we have former ad industry executive and now the founder and CEO of Make Love, Not Porn, Ms. Cindy Gallop. Hi, Cindy. Welcome back.
Hi, Bob. Thank you. Delighted to be here.
And finally, we have the founder and executive producer of the CISO series, Mr. David Spark, joins us. David, hi.
It's been a while.
It has been a while.
Thrilled to be back.
Glad to have you on the program. Always fun. Well, David's the one who sent me this article this week. Kind of, let me know that it was going around, and it's pretty scathing. Zoe Scaman, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her name right, but hopefully I am. Is a UK advertising professional, and she wrote an exhaustive treatise on the misogyny and sexual misconduct still present and thriving within the ad industry, resulting in a firestorm of commentary and controversy. Farrah, you know we've talked many times about this issue on the program, and there's always seems to be new angles to discuss, but I'm going to start where I think it's most interesting right off the bat, and we can take it wherever it needs to go. But for me, the biggest revelation now is that abusers are more and more hiding in plain sight as they advocate for DEI initiatives or diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And I'm wondering if that's going to be the tack they're going to take, what can ad professionals do to combat rank duplicitousness of the whole situation? I mean, what do you do when the abuser is hawking DEI initiatives?
Well, I think it's a useful way to sort of, first of all, kick the can as far away from them as they can get it. It's also a way to look like they're doing something. It's a way to kind of pink wash, I guess, their reputations, make them look like they are friendly to women and people of color when they're not. I think the bigger problem is that, as we were saying before the show began, this was something that came up a couple of years ago and didn't get resolved then. And so, that's given people time to figure out what their new cover story is going to be. And I think, we were, as I was kind of getting ready for the show earlier today, talking about it with my husband, we were sort of just discussing how, my personal feeling about this, having worked for some of these people, is that they stick around because a lot of agencies still kind of operate on what a friend of mine who worked in the news business referred to as the star model. Everything's sort of talent driven at a certain level. When an agency's real kind of claim to fame is its people and not its process or its philosophy or anything else, then you retain the talent that draws other talent or wins awards or clients like. So I think one of the problems there is that. And as long as we're kind of propping up stars, he's too big to fail, he's too big to fire, then they can always reinvent themselves in some new way. And so, my solution would be cut all of those guys' salaries in half and double the salaries of the account execs and the junior creatives. Hire more of them. Stop this sort of star model that preserves and defends people who have big reputations but also very bad behavior.
So that sounds great in theory, but you know that can't work out, right?
Yeah, but that's why I don't work in advertising anymore.
So you can't offer unrealistic solutions. I mean, seriously. I mean, you know that's unrealistic.
So what is a realistic solution? Because literally what we do now is we complain, we sue, and nothing else happens. So I think it is time actually to start talking about quote unquote unrealistic solutions. The whole culture is rotten from the ground up.
Let's just say you put your plan into effect. Let's just say, okay, we now cut all the executive salary in half, or whomever you choose in half. Well, now these people are all looking for another company to work for who will pay them their market rate. Now the people who actually bring the money into the company are now gone, and now you've hired a lot of junior people who are incapable of doing that, and you now no longer have an actual business.
You see, I disagree with you.
What I'm advocating for is a hiring policy that says no assholes. So
yes, we all want that.
Okay.
Yeah, David, listen.
At the beginning, it's happening in plain sight. So it's not really sometimes assholes. It's behavior that's not necessarily seen as an asshole up front, but it's hiding in plain sight, and people are complicit. I think the more the issue is, multiple people are complicit. Like in the example in the article, a lot of the things that happened to these women were done in front of a crowd of people. The issue is often other people being complicit.
Yeah,
that's literally what I'm saying. It's that we prop them up. The more typical story is, and Zoe outlined some of those in her piece, and some of the people who talked to her and told her their own stories had this, of going to HR, of things that happened in front of colleagues, that happened in front of HR sometimes, and they complained to HR, and it's like, no, he's too big to get rid of. Like, sorry, you are the less important person, the less valuable person here than everybody else. And I think one of the problems here is we have accepted as just true that these high earners, these senior guys, these people who are, maybe they're jerks in nice guy clothing, I don't know, but they are so important that only they can bring in business, only they can attract clients, only they can attract talent. And I don't think that's necessarily true.
Punish a person without kicking them out. So yes, let's say, in many of the situations that were outlined in the article, that they take these complaints seriously. And that is really what it comes down to, taking them seriously and moving forward. And that's, I think, what these people who is essentially exhibit this behavior.
I'm gonna support Farrah on this one, David. I mean,
I'm not against.
No, I know. You guys are agreeing. Your
suggestion was just unrealistic.
No, I think it's a very realistic. To stop the star model is the only way that you're going to get people to be taken seriously when they lodge complaints. I mean, it always comes down to whether or not the person lodging the complaint is taken seriously.
And cutting everyone's salary in half are two very different things.
Well, how do you disincentivize the star model?
First of all,
how do you stop it?
How you disincentivize it is that you have limits. Everything has limits. Everything can have limits, and you as an organization have to determine what those limits are. All right, and you don't take the harsh thing. I mean, it's just unrealistic to do that. If certain individuals are responsible for the best creative or bringing the clients in, then they are rewarded for that. I mean, that's how models of all businesses work like that. So, I mean, that, you treat those people better because they're the ones who are literally making the business. Now,
David, before you go on, I mean, it's just like the way that the article laid out the problem is that they're getting the business by fostering this very abusive situation. I mean, it's just like you've got one abuser talking to another abuser, getting a relationship, and then the relationship of one abuser is brought into another abuser's home. It's just like it's not.
Yes, I agree with all of that. Yes, I'm in full agreement there. Yeah. That is not behavior that should be fostered.
Right. And it's just like, and that's the core of the problem. And I think Farrah brings up a really, really good point that ending the star model is the essential way to get respect for complaints. Now, I mean, yeah, I agree. It's highly unlikely that people are immediately going to start having their salaries cut in half and everybody's going to walk the line and do things right. I mean, we know that doesn't happen because we've been talking about this issue for for years and years and years. And Cindy, I'd love to get you in on this conversation a little bit. What do we do to change it? How do we change this model and bring it forward? What would you suggest?
I will tell you exactly what I suggest, because when you reference quite rightly that Me Too came up in our industry 4 years ago, it came up because I made it come up. So in October 2017, when the New York Times did their stunning expose of Harvey Weinstein, I saw an opportunity. I've been speaking out about misogyny and sexual harassment in our industry for years, and I've been speaking out publicly about it because nobody else would. And so I posted on Facebook back in October of 2017, and I said, the time has come to name names in the same way that those brave women stood up and spoke out publicly about the horrors that Harvey Weinstein had put them through. And I said, the time has finally come. Women and men of the advertising industry, please, if you are ready to finally tell these stories publicly, name names, email me, and I will connect you with trusted reporters in our industry media who will help you break these stories. And, honestly, that was just me seeing this opportunity and thinking maybe now, finally, people will speak up. I did not anticipate the avalanche of emails that hit my inbox, and by the way, have continued ever since. And basically, I was, and I went on stage at 3% conference where I was giving the closing keynote the following month, and I was so horrified by everything that turned up in my inbox that I rewrote my keynote at the last minute and made the front half of it all about what I was seeing. And I said to the audience, I always knew it was bad. I never knew how bad it really was. And my solution, which I have been working to try and make happen for the past 4 years, is that these stories had to be broken publicly in the media with names named. And the only thing that is not has not made that happen to date is fear. And it's fear on a couple of fronts. And by the way, this is fear for both women and for men, because I was also contacted by men who have been sexually harassed by powerful gay men in our industry. And I was contacted by men who encountered the flip side of sexual harassment and misogyny, which is bullying. And so abusive bullying behavior happens to the men in our industry as well as the women. And basically, nobody was willing to speak up and go on the record, because the powerful men doing the harassing and the bullying are the gatekeepers of everything. They are the gatekeepers of jobs, pay raises, promotions, awards, trips to Cannes Lions, career paths, ambitions. And what I heard time and time again was, if I speak up, I'll never work again. I've got a family to support. I need my job. I can't speak up. The other thing that stopped people speaking up back then and subsequently is the endemic use of NDAs in our industry. Our industry has been buying women's and men's silence for years, with payoffs, with settlements, with NDAs, and those NDAs have enabled those men to go on and serially sexually harass and rape and bully and abuse again and again and again. So when I realized that this fear was the barrier to getting these stories broken, I did what our industry does. I strategized and considered how I could strategically and creatively come up with ways to remove that fear. So the first thing I did was I called on our industry. I called on holding companies, agencies, and everybody. And I said, I want you all to pledge that you will hire the whistleblowers, because whistleblowers are the true heroes of our industry. Whistleblowers are the people with principles, with integrity, who want to see a better industry. Everybody should be falling over themselves to hire these people. I want you to guarantee them that they will absolutely work again if they blow the whistle. And I was able to get a number of my friends who run small agencies to pledge that, but I was not able to get any of the big holding companies or agencies to do so. The second thing I did was I set out to guilt the men. And I put the call out. And by the way, the industry media all around the world, because my inbox was global, we're talking about a global issue. I worked with reporters in the trade, in our trade press all around the world. And they were very supportive in putting these messages out. I said to the men of the advertising industry all around the world, men who stood by, watched, stayed silent, laughed, participated, joined in. This is where you get to look yourself in the eye in the mirror every morning. Now is the time to finally speak up. Speak up about what you witnessed. Speak up about what you participated in. Now is the time to put this right. And that worked. And a number of men came forwards, but they were all equally terrified. And then the third message I put out there was, I said, you can break your NDA. There were a couple of examples of brave women who'd done that with Harvey Weinstein. I said, it is possible to break an NDA. And by the way, that is truer today than ever before.
Cindy, I have a question. I have a question about the NDAs. How extensive are they? What is exactly they're asking in the NDA?
Basically that you will say nothing about what happened at all. And I have to tell you also,
what do you mean what happened? Just you're not allowed to speak of anything that happens like within the four walls of the agency, something like that?
These are women who were raped. These are women who are sexually assaulted, who are attacked.
No, I understand, but I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to understand why they couldn't break an NDA if that happened, if they were raped or assaulted, because that's a crime.
Because what happens when these women go to HR is the full force of the agency and the holding company and lawyers come down on them, and the fear of God is put into them. They are forced to sign these documents. And they are told that if they ever speak about this to anybody, awful things will happen to them. Literally every Hollywood movie you've ever seen about the mob putting the fear of God into a witness, apply that to the advertising industry. And by the way, every other industry that does this. So NDA is endemic. Payoffs are endemic, settlements are endemic, and the people who have signed. They believe their ability to talk away are too terrified to even consider breaking them. And the thing is, to my point, I mean, the two things I try to get out there were, A, you can break an NDA, especially if a whole bunch of you come forwards about the same man, the same agency, the same holding company, especially in the current climate.
Shouldn't you be able to break an NDA just because it's what they're asking for is illegal? I mean, in the state of New York, at least, and where most of the big agency holding companies have presence. I mean, the New York state law requires that if a report of sexual harassment is issued, they've got to go to the authorities. There are channels where you can go through to the authorities.
Yeah, there's state laws that are like, if you report something to a manager, the manager is required to report it. I know that's the case in California.
So wouldn't that be enough? Wouldn't that be enough grounds to throw out an NDA?
One of the things about this is about power balance. It's that may be technically true, but it's not. That's not what
we're agreeing that this is all happening.
Yeah. No, but what I'm saying is the person who's being force-fed an NDA is not aware of their rights, and they're not being advised about them.
That is common,
trying to get them to sign. So yes, they have rights to break the NDA. That's why Cindy's made that call, but they don't know that. And in the meantime, they've got a very rich, very deep-pocketed, corporation who's threatening them with, acts of God.
And for the sake of the listeners out there, Farrah has a law degree, so she knows what she's talking about. But Cindy, I'm sorry to interrupt. You go on. I just wanted to clarify that one point.
The other thing I tried to put out there was, you may have signed an NDA, your partner didn't, your husband didn't, your boyfriend didn't, your mother didn't, your father didn't, your friends didn't, your family didn't. Other people can speak up. This actually happened again in the Harvey Weinstein case, where a woman's partner spoke up because he was with her. They were in a relationship when everything went down with Harvey Weinstein. So essentially, I've tried over the past 4 years to put as many things out there as possible to make people feel able to speak up. I have not succeeded. The following year at the 3% conference, I said to the audience, I told you a year ago I would help get these stories broken, these names named. I'm here to tell you I failed. And I explained I failed because quite understandably, there is massive fear, but I'm not giving up. And I said, the powerful men who think you've gotten away with it, you haven't. The powerful women who have enabled men to harass and covered up for them, you haven't gotten away with it either. And that's why I'm so pleased that Zoe had the bravery to write her piece. I'm so pleased about all the women who contributed to it. And I'm really pleased that now, 4 years later, we are at a tipping point where I believe the times have changed sufficiently that now we will be able to get these stories broken and we'll be able to get those names named. And the reason why this is the solution is because I obviously know who those names are. And I stood on the stage at the 3% conference and said, I went through everything that I was horrified and appalled by in terms of what turned up in my inbox. And I said, I am horrified and appalled at the names. These are names of men I thought were good guys. These are names of men I considered friends. These are names of men who've sat across from me, looked me in the eye at a meeting over a lunch and told me how much they support women. And I can tell you that when those names come out, that is absolutely the thing that will blow all of this apart and end it forever in our industry, because it will demonstrate how systemic this is and how much those men, to Farrah's point, within the star model, have been covered up and supported. And, literally, that there is one man in our industry where known in terms of one of the people testifying to this are 8 settlements for this particular serial rapist and sexual harasser. And those are just the ones that my informant knew of had actually been made, that there are potentially many more.
You mentioned the article was a good step forward toward making this happen, but one of the things that I was surprised about, maybe not surprised considering the fact of the power imbalance, but not a single name was named in the article. No one was willing to come forward. Does that hamper the article in any way? Do you guys feel like...
No, absolutely not, because again, this is entirely understandable. So you may or may not recall that, again, back, this was 3 years ago, there was an anonymous Instagram account called Diet Madison Avenue. Right. It was modeled on Diet Prada, that Diet Prada is the fashion industry version. And that account did name names. And by the way, I hasten to add that I don't endorse that approach at all. I worked with journalists in all of our trade media for them to do the investigative journalism and, the witness bearing, and absolutely break this the way the New York Times broke the Harvey Weinstein story. But anyway, Dark Madison Avenue named names and was sued by several of the men it did name, shut down, and those cases will be progressing in court. So no, there is absolutely no way that Zoe should have named names, or any of those women should have named names in that article. Right. That is the task of our industry media, and I can tell you, because I've been talking to them consistently for the past 4 years. I'm now talking to them currently, and they are saying to me, we have not done enough. They feel guilty as well. They know the responsibility lies with them, because, and in fact, when Jodie Cantor and Megan Twohey published their brilliant book, She Said, which was all about exactly how they went about the Harvey Weinstein investigation, I bought copies of that book and I sent them to the editors-in-chief of all of our industry trade publications, and I went, here's the template. This is the process you follow. And by the way, Jodie and Megan did it through paperwork. She Said is an absolute must-read. Their investigative journalistic process is a must-read. And I said to all of our trade media, this is the process you follow. And I want to see them do that.
I think you bring up a lot of good points about that. I mean, I really do agree with you that it is on the backs of the journalists out there to do that kind of work. But I will point out that our journalists...
Farrah, she's got the law degree.
Yeah.
What is the danger of naming names? Because can't the people who are named, I don't know the legal term, but is it slander, or what is it that you as a journalist would need to have to protect yourself, from an accusation of slander, or what else? I mean, what does a journalist need to have in their back pocket to be able to name names, I guess, is my question.
Well, as Cindy said, it's pretty well laid out in Jodie and Megan's book about their process. But the process is fairly standard. It's you are looking for either firsthand. Well, you need both frequently. You need sort of firsthand testimony. Essentially, you need the person who experienced the event to have contemporaneous to the event talk to other people about it, and they remember it and are able to speak to that. The other part of it is documentary evidence. The NDAs, the settlements, those pieces of paper can be shared. And then there are other things that people often kind of hold on to emails. They hold on to text messages. They hold on to other kind of documentary evidence around it. And so you would want to assemble all of that.
It's a considerable sort of lineage of evidence you need before you could expose a name.
And,
yes?
And that brings up my point, which I was trying to make before, was, we all know that the trade press is not the New York Times. I mean, the New York Times has investigative journalists who are seasoned professionals in breaking big stories, whereas the trade press deals mainly with, friendly interviews with your subject matter and making sure that you have, the press release on the latest latest ad campaign.
Investigative journalism is very expensive.
Right.
You're absolutely right, guys. And this is why, so a couple of things. The first is that when this avalanche hit my inbox, I set up calls with the editors of the trade publications I chose to work with in each region, so in the US, in the UK, in Asia, in India, in Australia. And I said, before I pass these leads on to you, I want to know two things. I want to know that you will absolutely commit to going after these stories and doing the same type of investigative journalism as the New York Times did with Harvey Weinstein. And the second thing I want to know is that when big holding company X comes down on you like a ton of bricks, you will absolutely stand firm and break these stories. And the people I spoke to committed to doing this. And my point people in each case, every journalist was female that I worked with on a day-to-day basis. But you're absolutely right. Our industry trade press does not have the resources and the budgets to be able to put into breaking these stories all of the effort someone like the New York Times can. And that absolutely gutted the women I worked with because they cared passionately about breaking these stories. They had their whole day jobs to do at industry publications that, as you know, have suffered as much from budget cuts as every agency has. So that is a huge impediment. Because of that, I've also been working with national publications because what we're talking about is also a very serious business story. Every holding company in our industry is publicly traded. The amount of money that is going into these settlements and these payoffs is a very serious business issue and of public shareholder interest. And national business publications are very aware of that and would very much like to break this story as well. But again, they have to be able to get to exactly what Farrah talked about, which is the evidence, and they have struggled in that area as well. But I continue to try and work with them to make that happen.
Well, I think this conversation is really relevant and really pretty dynamic. I want to keep it going. I'm probably going to throw out the rest of the topics and just keep with this, but I do need to take a break real quick and talk about our sponsor. Today's show is brought to you by Wix. And if you don't know who Wix is the leading cloud-based web design and development platform trusted by over 200 million people worldwide. So when your agency partners with Wix, you can unlock an entire digital ecosystem for creating, managing, and growing your business online, allowing you to run your agency the way you've always wanted to. You get the full coding and design freedom to create anything your client needs, along with the tools to manage and collaborate with your team seamlessly from anywhere. And when it comes to growing your business, you can get matched with new leads every day and earn revenue share for every website you create. And they'll all be backed by Wix's industry-leading security and site performance. You'll also have dedicated account managers on standby 24/7 so you can reach your goals and start setting new ones. But don't take my word for it. See for yourself. Head over to wix.com/partners and reimagine what your agency can accomplish. That's wix.com/partners And we thank them very much for the support of the show. Now, Farrah, getting back into this conversation, I don't know if we've hacked it to death, but we can continue talking about it from other angles or whatever. What do we need to do to support women on an everyday basis? Is it men coming forward and taking the hit? I mean, it's just like, it doesn't seem like that's the right move. It seems like women have to stand up and say their own piece about this issue, but men have to play a part as well. And what is that part?
Well, I think part of it is the not just being the silent bystander and certainly not being the active participant. The kind of standing there watching it happen is probably one of the most discouraging things that can happen to the woman it is happening to. Like we talked about at the beginning, a lot of these things happen in front of other people. They happen in meetings. They happen in front of clients. They happen at conferences. And, when you see your colleagues, male and female, standing there watching it happen, sometimes laughing along, sometimes participating, it doesn't suggest to you that anybody there has your back. And so I think the first thing is men and women who have been bystanders in the past have to stop being bystanders. They need to speak up, and they need to speak up in the moment. They need to try to shut it down. They need to have that woman's back when she does file a complaint. They need to encourage her to file a complaint if she wants to. I think a lot of it is about just saying, and this is why I threw the grenade into the pond at the beginning. We have to kind of bust this idea that there are untouchables in our business. Nobody's untouchable. And so the only way to kind of prove that is to do it. You can't keep kind of saying, well, that guy's really well liked by, the chief creative officer, and so therefore, or that client really loves that guy, so we can't possibly do anything about it. And, the speaking up can't always be on the person who is on the receiving end of the bad behavior. The person who is being victimized in the moment is often just trying to cope her way through or his way through the experience. The people who are watching it have an obligation. So that's one thing. And the problem is, I think there's been kind of a mixed record on, active bystander training and how effective that is and everything else. But there has to be sort of a breaking of the stranglehold of there are people who are too big to fire. And I think the other part of it is there has been, and I think this was kind of one of the weirder moments in some respects of the Me Too movement, but it was the Aziz Ansari story, right? Which got kind of hand waved away by Caitlin Flanagan and other people as like a bad date. And on the one hand, a lot of women have been on that date. And so it was easy for a lot of women, frankly, to say, well, that's not Harvey Weinstein, right? It just was a bad date. He's a bit of a jerk, like whatever. He was playing on the edges of consent. And whether he understood that that's what he was doing or not kind of doesn't matter. And the thing about the story of it is that I think it helped us get to a place where we can say, sure, 20 years ago we would say, or 10 years ago, 5 years ago, we'd say that was a bad date. But now I think we can say that's not a bad date. That is something else. And we should up our expectations that there should be a higher standard for getting consent and not exploiting power differentials between men and women and between famous people and not famous people, or highly paid 6-figure plus bonuses, executive creative directors and junior copywriters out on a shoot. Like all of those power dynamics have to kind of be called into question. And so that can't always go on the backs of the victims. And it has to be something that from the top down, we say we're not doing this anymore. And I think one of the problems is structurally how AHR works. The purpose of HR is to protect the corporation, not the people who work there. And so that is why that giant sort of ton of bricks comes down on the women who do complain. We have to break these NDAs, absolutely. And there has to be a real demonstration that there will be a receiving end to the women who do that. And so that's why I think what Cindy's been trying to do with getting any kind of press coverage and investigative journalism into this, I'd love to see the Journal cover this. Like, I would love to see the business press cover this. That would, I think, start to signal to women that they can speak up, and it would simultaneously signal to the corporations and the holding companies and the HR departments that this is not something that can be swept under the rug for sometimes as little as like $60,000. And a shitty NDA, pardon my language. Like all of that is part and parcel of the problem. So yes, women should speak up and should be specific about their complaints. That I think was the real power of Zoe's piece. She didn't name names, but she was highly specific. If you worked in London agencies, you know who she's talking about. And so there is there is an ability to kind of decipher what she's talking about. Frankly, it inspired me to be specific at the very least about the roles and the agencies where I experienced bad behavior. It was not, thankfully for me, nearly as violent as what Zoe had clearly experienced, but it was certainly something that made me alter the course of my career. And, being willing to do that, I mean, my Apple Watch told me that my heart rate jumped up just tweeting about something that happened 20 years ago. And I don't work in agencies anymore. It is not a risk to me to talk about those things, and yet it still does feel like a risk. So I think we've got to really understand that it's not just like, to flip a switch and everybody comes forward. We have to start kind of creating the landing pad for people who want to come in to tell us about what's happened. And to do that, you've got to kind of disarm HR, disarm the holding companies, create an open space for it, be a collector of evidence, provide the credibility to these claims, and the people who are standing around watching it happen have to stop just standing there.
It's interesting to me. Obviously, this is a problem where women are being harassed by men primarily. But what about the converse? Is there any kind of situation where women are harassing men within the industry that needs to be taken care of? And I don't mean to bring that up for any other reason except that I've been sexually harassed by a boss before in a workplace environment where it's just like, and the people around me just treated me like, oh, you're her favorite, you know what I mean, and made fun of me. It's just like, it was terrible. It was a really horrible experience. And, it feels yucky, but it's just like, as a guy, I never came forward with something like that. I mean, it's just like I felt no power to do that. Is that a real problem, or is that just the kind of a out there scenario that never happens?
Right. What I can tell you, and I talk about this publicly as well, because it's an entirely fair question to ask, is that in all of my years in the ad industry, and in the 4 years since I made my call out and got that avalanche of emails, I have never had any incidents of a man being sexually harassed by a woman in our industry. So that is an outlier.
It is an outlier.
Yeah. But what I have heard from, which is worth talking about in this context, is, as I mentioned earlier, the men doing the sexual harassing and raping are frequently, the flip side of that is that they are bullies and abusers to all and sundry. And so I heard from men who had been extraordinarily emotionally impacted by bullying from their bosses. I mean, one man literally described himself as having PTSD, and they have a different barrier to contend with, because these men cannot bring themselves to go to HR or to complain because of their fear of what people would think of a man who was so massively emotionally impacted by another man's behavior, because that does not accord with our societal construct of masculinity. And so those men who were suffering from serious degrees of abuse and bullying also felt that they could not complain and could not speak up because they would be thought the less of as men.
Well, that sounds like it's describing me. I think that was really true. Let me turn to David now, because it's just like, I'd love to get your thoughts on where we go from here. I mean, it's just like, I know you posted out that you brought up at the very beginning that you need to stand up and call it out. You need to name names. You need to be out there. But what else can we be doing to change the ratio and make things better for all women working within the industry and quite frankly, even men?
So let me begin by saying that I agree with everything except cutting salaries in half.
You got to let it go, David.
So literally everything that's been said, I'm in agreement, because I just didn't think that was a logical solution. But yes, I have been witness to this behavior when working in advertising when I was very young, in my early 20s. And I was complicit. But again, this goes back many decades, and we don't have the dialogue that we have today, which very much speaks out and says, speak up. So I like what you said of other men supporting women when they see this, saying they have the back, even going to HR with the woman to be the support when she makes that complaint. That would also be a very good move as well. I think also executives. One thing I also want to point out, I don't believe that a rainmaker for a company, a superstar in the company, also equals sexual harasser. So you could be a rainmaker for a company and be very ethical and not sexually harass. I think that could be doable.
There are lots of ways to reward earners. I'm not making an equivocation that if you make
right.
half
No,
$1 million
I don't think you are. But I just want to make that clear that doesn't go hand in hand. But the other thing is, I think what would squash this a lot faster is if the executives put out a zero tolerance policy for this behavior. That the executive speaks up before any young woman needs to speak up at all. They make it clear to the organization that this type of behavior is not tolerated. And let me give you examples of it.
I have to tell you, every single holding company and agency in our industry has said, especially in the wake of my call out 4 years ago, we have a zero tolerance policy, and it's changed nothing. I know exactly.
But there's more to the story. The more to the story is we have a zero tolerance policy, and let me explain to you what you do if you actually see this. If you see behavior like X, Y, and Z, you go to the human resources, this person, we will take all complaints seriously, and that needs to be said. And to just say we have a zero tolerance policy and nothing else, that's BS. But to say we have a zero tolerance and this is how it's actually acted upon, this is how you can do it, and if you don't get satisfaction there, you come to me. I mean, that is what can be done if it's clearly made out. Yes, there's a lot of lip service that goes on in the industry. I've seen it plenty myself. But if you actually walk people through the process and not just give lip service, then action can be taken.
So I've spent the last about 8 months now working on a project related to corporate compliance. And so I've been spending a lot of time talking to chief compliance officers and people who are responsible for setting up compliance programs at publicly traded companies. One of the things about the calculus around compliance, and here I'm speaking about regulatory compliance, but it applies to reputational risk as well. And that is that what they essentially do is they make a calculation. What is the likelihood of enforcement and what is the impact of penalty? How likely is it that the regulator is going to come after me? And if they come after me, what's my risk? How much am I going to have to pay? Am I going to go out of business? If the likelihood that someone's going to come after you is low, then you kick the can down the road. If the impact of the penalty is really high, then you might start to say to yourself, we should start a program to get into compliance in the next 2 to 5 years. If both of the things are high, it is both urgent and important, as it were, then they suddenly get on the stick and start spending money on getting into compliance. Reputational risk, as it turns out, works exactly the same way. If they don't think there's any reputational risk, investors won't care, the trade press won't care, there won't be a bad headline about them, then they kick it down the road. And the problem with saying we're going to have a zero tolerance policy and we're going to take these complaints seriously is that isn't actually how compliance programs work. It's not how HR functions. The job of the corporations is to protect itself because they are trying to protect their shareholder value. And so as long as that is the primary purpose of HR and all of these internal systems, then taking a complaint seriously backfires on the person complaining. And so there have to be other kind of forces beyond, I mean, yes, of course, they should have these official policies. But there have to be other forces. It cannot just be that. Because the structure does not work that way. The structure works against the person making the complaint, not against the person being complained about, because the person being complained about is an employee. One of the first things that happens when you file a complaint for sexual harassment is the company moves to separate from you. And the reason they do that is so that you are outside the tent. Once you are outside the tent, you have no protection of the company. And that's the point. You've complained about the company. You are not one of us anymore. And so the whole structure of quote unquote compliance immediately runs against the person doing the complaining. And so like that sounds great. And it would be wonderful if that was the way that it worked. It just isn't the way that it works. And so there have to be other risks that countervail the like, oh, well, there was a Me Too movement and no one really covered the advertising industry about it. So it didn't really come home to roost here. There weren't really that many big, bad headlines. There was a story about the Martin agency and the Journal, and then that was it. The impacts are not really coming home to roost. And so as long as they don't, there is no incentive for any of the big holding companies to change anything about their policies. They've ticked the boxes. They're good enough. So you have to have outside influence in much the same way that, like, as long as Harvey Weinstein is doing really well at the box office and winning Oscars, no one's coming after him. It takes New York Times reporters and Ronan Farrow going after him in order to start the conversation about how this man is a serial rapist. And that should be the proof that it's not good enough to say we take these inquiries seriously and we have a zero tolerance policy, because these were actual crimes. A lot of what goes down in agencies doesn't rise to the level of physical assault. It's mere sexual harassment, which is not a crime. It's a civil tort. I can sue you about it, but you're never going to go to jail. So, like, the stakes, even when they're that high, all of the sort of structural forces accrue to the benefit of the person who's the rainmaker. And that's why I want to dismantle the rainmakers, frankly. So, I get that you don't want your salary cut. I'm not coming for yours. But what I am saying is we have to stop.
I own my own company, so no.
So then you're good. Then you're all good. You don't have to worry about this at all. Then the whole point of it is simply to say, and look, I think people should be rewarded for performance, absolutely. But there is a kind of system in place that puts people who are famous, award-winning, respected by certain kinds of men, loved by a client, provocative, whatever, in a position of power, and they get paid enormous sums of money to do it, while all of the people who are actually doing the work are being paid $30,000 a year. When you're making $30,000 a year as a junior account executive who's been sexually harassed by the head of the account, who's making $500,000 a year, you cannot possibly afford to complain, because now you've got to go find another job, and you've got to try to do that without bringing with you the reputational risk to you of having accused this famous, well-respected man of something bad.
No,
there's got to be
a long history of that. I mean, what you described, there's a long history of that.
Yeah. And I'm just saying, there are incentives in place that should really be looked at. Now, I think that's about as likely as HR suddenly becoming a defender of the working class. But that does not mean that the underlying structure does not need to be, frankly, torn down and built anew.
Now, I want to take one last left turn on this topic before we get off it, and I'm going to go to Cindy on this one, since you seem to be the expert and have a lot of information about it. It seems like men are the predators in this situation 99.9% of the time. But we never hear about the sexual harassment, or at least I never hear about the sexual harassment complaints lodged by gay men against gay creative directors or executives or industry executives. Is there a problem in that area as well? And should that be addressed at the same time, or is that not as much an issue?
No, it absolutely is. And again, I spoke publicly about this from the stage at the 3% conference as, part of my inbox. I've been speaking publicly about it ever since. There are absolutely men in our industry who are harassed by powerful gay men, and exactly the same thing applies. They are terrified to speak up. Those men, again, are the gatekeepers of jobs and promotions and pay raises. It's exactly the same scenario. I mean, there are obviously far fewer cases because our industry is extraordinarily homophobic. And so it is, that also makes it really difficult for the men who are being harassed and molested. And by the way, it's also important to say that all of this also applies to clients and brand marketers.
Yes, so that was something that really stood out in the article. The article really took the time to talk about that.
Exactly, and so in the case of gay men encountering this, it is just as appalling. They are just as damaged. They are just as retaliated against. They are just as much forced out of the industry.
Well, this has been eye-opening. I think we could go for another hour on this conversation, but obviously we're running low on time, so I'm just going to go with this week's Fair, Fail, Foul. But before we get to that segment of the show, I do want to take this quick opportunity to thank my guests again and allow them to each do a shameless plug for themselves, starting with Farrah Bostic. You can find her at thedifferenceengine.com. That's the home of her strategy consultancy, where she does all kinds of work, it sounds like. So tell us what's going on in your world, Farrah. What would you like to promote?
Yeah, I think the main thing is that now that things are, I don't know if, no, I'm not going to use the phrase getting back to normal because nothing ever goes back to normal. But now that things are a little different, we have been able to kind of come back to this study that we started last fall into how people make decisions in sort of things that are important to them. So small decisions, big decisions, long-term decisions. And we're about to release the report of what we found, and it's pretty interesting.
That's great.
So that'll be up soon.
Fantastic. We'll take a look for it. Next up, we have Cindy Gallop. You can find her at makelovenotporn.com. There's also a shorter address, which I'm sure she'll give you. But tell us what's going on in your world, Cindy. What would you like to promote?
Sure. I think what I would like to have everybody understand is that sexual harassment is the single biggest business issue facing our industry today. And the reason for that, why it's sexual harassment and not diversity and inclusion, is because sexual harassment manages out of the industry and keeps out of power, leadership, and influence the women leaders who would make diversity, equity, and inclusion happen. And so in this context, I would like to promote my consultancy services. You can find a rundown of them at cindygallop.com, but I am available to work with brands, agencies, holding companies who genuinely want to drive systemic organizational change and integrate diversity, equity, and inclusion into their day-to-day working processes to end everything that we've talked about in the interests of retaining brilliant female talent and doing far better business and making far more money as a result.
And for those of you who don't know Cindy, Cindy has been an agency executive at the highest levels throughout both England and in the UK and in the United States. So definitely somebody to work with if you need that kind of help. Last but not least, we have David Spark. You can find him at cisoseries.com. It's a whole series of podcasts and other content surrounding the Chief Information Security Officer business. So tell us what's going on in your world. What would you like to promote, David?
Well, first, I want to just say that I was on with two experts and on what we turned into a single topic show, which was pretty darn cool. So I feel that, I have no expertise on the topic that we spoke at hand. So I want to
But
say
you brought it to my attention, so I really appreciate it.
Well,
it's just like I wasn't paying attention to the
Twitter.
I wasn't paying attention to the
Cindy
news.
And Farrah for that
I never
matter.
even watched Twitter.
What I
anymore.
do is completely out of left field, given what our topic is. I was in advertising for many years, but now I am a media producer, and it's all in the space of cybersecurity. And so I will just say, if anyone's listening, you have cybersecurity clients, you should be aware of my brand, CISOseries.com. We are significant in the cybersecurity industry.
Fantastic. And it's a really great show, and he does some really excellent work in that area. So definitely check it out. If you have anything to do with data or information security, you need to be a part of this. As for me, for more information about me or the show, visit thebeancast.com. There you can find a complete show archive, find out how to consult with me, and of course you can find out how to advertise on this program. So check it all out at thebeancast.com. And now it is time for this week's Fair, Fail, Foul, a rundown of the best and worst of advertising, marketing, and public relations from the last week. First up, the fair, and I've got two of them here. Cindy, this agency called Fingerpaint CEO, Ed Mitzen, committed $4 million to paying off his employees' student loan debt. I thought this was, for a PR move, this is fantastic. But to put up $4 million of your own money to do something like this shows real commitment to the talent. I think this is a great move and fantastic. What do you think about this? Did we lose Cindy?
Sorry. Sorry, start off with Farrah then. No, I think it's absolutely fantastic. I love that he did that. I was completely blown away by that. And it's a terrific move for him because, you look at that and go, oh my God, I want to go and work for that agency. So fantastic.
Yeah, it really was a really great move. As for the other fair for this week, Farrah, did you see the giant 3D cat billboard in Japan? Did you get a chance to take a look at that video? Is that not the coolest thing? I mean, it works even in videos.
It's very good. I mean, there had been a version of it that was like, I don't know, it was a water tank or the ocean or something like that in Seoul earlier. But this was beautiful. And however, I did find myself, after I stared at it for a little too many loops, thinking, set the kitty free. but I loved it. It was beautiful.
Oh, man. Now, the fail for this week, I'm going to give to Sony, David, because Sony ran an Australian ad for the PS5 that featured their product erroneously upside down in the ad. I mean, you can blame the production company, you can blame the ad agency who worked on it, you can blame anybody who's involved with this, but you don't put the product upside down. I mean, this is a bonehead move.
It just sounds like the editor to hit the flip thing on that little clip. I think is what happened.
Probably.
And it did lead to some jokes about apparently an older version of the PlayStation where you had to kind of flip it upside down to get it to restart, which probably had to do with heating and cooling of the components inside. But so maybe that was a tip. I don't know.
Maybe it was. Now, the foul of this week I'm going to give to the guy who was banned from MLB, that's Major League Baseball for those of you out of the States, was banned from MLB venues for hanging Trump won banners, and yet he got 1,000% bump in sales for his merchandise from the stunt. Farrah, that's a great marketing program. It's a successful marketing program. It's still pretty much a foul-tasting marketing program. There's no way I can, applaud this at all.
Well, it's the cancel culture strategy. Get yourself canceled and you'll make a ton of money.
Well, have a suggestion for this list or just want to discuss it? Comment online. Use the hashtag FairFailFoul. That's #FairFailFoul. And that does it for this week's show. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit our website at thebeancast.com and click on the subscribe link. If you're an Apple Podcast listener, we've also provided a direct link to our listing there, or just search for the BeanCast in the podcast directory on the Apple Podcasts app. And whichever podcast directory you use, when you subscribe, please leave us a review. Got a comment, have a question? We'd love to hear from you. Just send your emails to beancast@gmail.com. Opening theme was performed by Joe Seibel. Closing theme by C. Jax. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Norp. We'll be back again next week. Hope you'll join us then.
You know what I mean? It's like if it's, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. Just like, okay, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like totally like that. It's like, I don't know, like if it's, it's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like kind of, it just seems like it's just like almost exactly. It's like exactly. Yeah. You know what I mean? Exactly.
Cool beans.